So there are a few things that I particularly loved about working with Deepak and that I've found have had a huge impact, even in a very short time frame. The first was the ability to look at different levels of the problem that I came to him with. So I came to him with a small company that I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with, how the leadership were interacting with each other, and whether it was something that fit with my larger goals in life. And so we had a couple of big questions that were put on the table, but what Deepak was able to do was to work at two levels very effectively. So the first was the assessment of where things fit into my life. And in that, I think the single takeaway, or the single biggest takeaway, was the principle of comparative advantage for me. So I'm an economist, I know what comparative advantage means, but I hadn't quite thought about it in the context of my life. So working with Deepak, what I've learned and what I've actually been actively putting into place is that some of the things that I'm best at and some of the things I most like to do were also the things that I was putting last on my list because I was focusing on getting everything else done before I moved into what was for me what I'm very passionate about. And I had it framed in my mind as something of duty before pleasure or something, something along those lines. And hearing it reframed as comparative advantage, that the act of doing all of these other things that are fine, that I was fine at, but are not necessarily the things that I've built a professional reputation on, that I'm most excited about, is actually more like disregarding comparative advantage than being virtuous. And that simple reframing made so much sense, and everything started to fall in place for taking it might be a long-term set of decisions, but quite a transformative overall shift in my professional life. And it was a clear, succinct reframing that I wouldn't have come up with myself, but made an enormous amount of sense. One of the things that works really well in the consulting, that one needs to do in the consulting space, is to be able to hear and respond to what the client really needs. As a personality trait, one of the things that came out of the leadership assessment and of the professional assessment was that I tend to be far more opinionated about what the client should want to hear, which is great when you're working in an academic space and great when you're working in a thought leadership space. It is not so good when you're working in the consulting space. Recognizing that, having that be brought out clearly, and being able to acknowledge it as an area that I needed to work on within my existing professional life, it has been very, very helpful, and again, an insight that I wouldn't have come up with on my own. The third, just on a methodological part and on a process basis, one of the nicest parts about working with Deepak was the speed and efficiency with which he was able to combine interviews with me, interviews with people who knew me, along with more systematic personality tests. And I think the proof of how well that worked was I sent my assessment to my mother, who said, "Wait a minute, how long have you known this person? This is all true. He really knows you well. How long did this take?" And I think it's fairly amazing that over the course of really a few hours, there was this integration of insight from scientifically based assessments, integrated very well with the almost a 360 evaluation that rose to a level of knowledge that surprised even my own mother. And lastly, I think having come into this process being a bit skeptical of the value of leadership assessment and the value of coaching, I have been completely converted, and I think a lot of it has to do with Deepak's personal style, which is a mix of being analytical without being cold, but at the same time warm and sympathetic without being invasive. So that balance, I think, was something that helped me introspect. He asked a lot of very good questions, and at the same time feel that I was in a very safe space for being very open about what was happening in my professional life and where I wanted to go. So thank you, Deepak, and I look forward to working with you further, and I fully expect to do so as I continue with the transformative part of the professional advice.